100 Sleepy Facts About Ancient China. Hello there, and welcome to History to Fall Asleep. Tonight, we are traveling across a very long stretch of time. We will follow slow rivers through early farming villages, stand beside bronze vessels, glowing in firelight, listen for the crack of an oracle bone, and walk along roads that led toward the first Chinese empire. Ancient China is not one small story. Why? It is a world of many landscapes and many communities. It begins long before emperors, in villages where people learned to grow millet and rice, shape pottery, play music, and build homes near water. It continues through the Shang and Zhou dynasties, through the debates of Confucius and Daoist thinkers, and into the Qin and Han empires, when roads, writing, markets, and long-distance trade connected enormous distances. Some of the people we will meet are remembered by name. A royal woman named Fu Hao, a teacher called Confucius, an emperor who ordered an underground army of clay, a historian who wrote about rulers, rebels, travelers, and ordinary human ambition. But most of the people in this story are unnamed. They were farmers watching the weather, potters working clay, scribes holding brushes above bamboo strips, soldiers at a quiet frontier tower, families setting food beside the graves of people they loved. Their world was often difficult. Rivers flooded, harvests failed, states fought. Life could be brief and uncertain. Yet it was also a world of intense care. People watched stars. They made music from bone, bronze, and silk strings. They built canals. They polished jade. They found ways to write questions into a world that did not always answer clearly. As you listen, there is no need to remember every date, every dynasty, or every unfamiliar name. Let the details pass gently by. Think of them as lantern placed along a long road. You may notice one or two. You may let the rest drift into the dark. This is a calm journey through ancient China, from the earliest settled communities to the close of the Han dynasty in the year 220. Later, Chinese history will wait for another night. For now, we will stay with the ancient foundations: earth, water, bronze, writing, philosophy, silk, and the patient work of countless people whose lives helped shape a civilization. Take a slow breath. Let your shoulders become heavy. Let the noise of the day settle a little farther away. And whenever you are ready, we can begin. Fact 1. Ancient China was never one single place. When we say ancient China, it is tempting to imagine one kingdom with one ruler and one way of life. The real picture is wider and more interesting. Over thousands of us, people lived in river valleys, mountain basins, grasslands, forests, deserts, and coastal plains across a vast part of East Asia. They spoke different languages, grew different crops, and met one another through trade, migration, war, and marriage. The names Shang, Zhou, Qin, and Han describe important states and dynasties, but they do not describe every community that lived in the region. Ancient China was a long conversation between many places rather than a single story, beginning all at once. Fact 2. Two great river systems shaped early life: the Yellow River and the Yangtze River were not simply lines on a map. They were sources of water, food, travel, danger, and memory. In the north, communities often raised millet in drier landscapes near the Yellow River and its tributaries. Farther south, wetter lands encouraged the cultivation of rice. Rivers made fertile soil possible, but they could also change course, flood fields, and force villages to adapt. For many ancient families, the rhythm of the year was learned by watching water rise or fall, freeze, and return. Long before emperors built capitals, rivers had already taught people where to settle and when to move. Fact 3. Millet was one of the first important crops in the north. Millet is a small grain, but it helped support large changes in northern China. It grows well in regions with less rain than rice usually needs, and it can be made into porridge, cakes, and fermented drinks. Archaeologists find evidence of millet farming in very early settlements of northern China, where people gradually moved from gathering wild foods toward producing more of what they ate. Farming did not erase hunting, fishing, or gathering overnight. Instead, it gave communities another dependable source of food. A field of millet may not look dramatic, yet repeated harvests allowed people to remain in one place longer and build more lasting homes. Fact 4. Rice farming grew deep roots in the south. In the warmer and wetter regions around the Yangtze basin, rice became one of the great foundations of life. Rice farming required close attention to water, seasons, labor, and soil. It encouraged people to shape fields, manage wet ground, and cooperate across small communities. The story of rice is not only the story of a crop, it is also the story of patience. Seedlings had to be tended, water had to be guided, and harvests had to be stored against uncertain weather. Over many generations, rice cultivation helped support increasingly complex societies in southern and eastern China, while also creating food traditions that would remain important for thousands of years. Fact 5. Early villages. Mixed farming with older skills. The first farming villages were not filled with people who had forgotten the wild landscape. They still fished rivers, gathered plants, hunted animals, and used local materials with great care. Farming was added to a broad set of survival skills, rather than replacing everything that came before. In one season, a family might plant grain. In another, they might collect nuts, catch fish, repair tools, or gather reeds for baskets and roofs. This balance matters, because early life was never as simple as a line moving from primitive to advanced. It was a constant adjustment to changing weather, available food, and the knowledge passed down by elders. Fact 6. Bampo gives a glimpse of an early farming community. The Neolithic site of Bampo, near modern Xi'an, is often used to imagine the daily life of a settled farming village. Archaeologists found remains of houses, storage pits, pottery, tools, and burials there. The people of Bampo lived many thousands of years before the first Chinese empire, yet their community already had routines that feel familiar. Food had to be prepared, children cared for, pots fired, walls repaired, and supplies stored. round or semi-subterranean, and homes offered protection from weather, while the village itself gave people the advantage of living near one another and arena inner. Bampo reminds us that history begins not only in palaces, but in ordinary households working through an ordinary day. Fact 7. Zhou is known for very early bone flutes. At the ancient site of Zhou, archaeologists discovered flutes made from the wing bones of cranes. Some can still produce musical notes today. These instruments are extremely old, and they offer a quiet reminder that music belongs very deep in the human past. A flute does not preserve the songs that were played on it, but it preserves the possibility of music in a place where people also farmed, fished, and buried their dead. Perhaps melodies marked gatherings, ceremonies, or calm evenings near the water. The sound is gone, but the careful holes in bone remain. They suggest that ancient people did not live only by necessity. They also made room for rhythm, memory, and listening. Fact 8. Pottery changed what a household could do. Pottery made it easier to boil food, store grain, carry water, and prepare meals that would have been difficult with baskets or skins alone. Ancient Chinese communities developed many kinds of clay vessels, some practical and plain, others painted with careful designs. A pot begins as mud from the earth, but it becomes useful only through patience. Clay must be shaped, dried, and fired at the right temperature. That small process contains a large lesson about early technology. People learned to control materials and heat in ways that changed daily life. A storage jar standing quietly in a house could represent weeks of labor and the hope that food would still be there when winter came. Fact 9. Liangzhu was an early center of rice farming and water control. Understood, the Liangzhu culture flourished in the lower Yangtze region thousands of years ago. Its archaeological remains include a city site, carefully planned spaces, cemeteries, jade objects, and a remarkable system of dams and waterworks. UNESCO describes Liangzhu as evidence of an early regional state supported by rice cultivation and a shared belief system. The people who lived there did not have modern machines, yet they reshaped a watery landscape through coordinated labor. Water was not merely endured, it was directed, stored, and understood. Liangzhu shows that ancient China had more than one early center of complexity. The story does not begin only in the north. It also rises from wetlands, rice fields, and engineered earthworks in the south. Fact 10. Jade carried meanings beyond beauty. In ancient China, jade was valued. Jade was beautiful, not only because it was beautiful, but because it was difficult to work and rich in symbolic meaning. The stone is tough, and shaping it takes time, abrasive materials, and great skill. Neolithic cultures, including Liangzhu, made jade objects such as Kong tubes and Bai discs. Their exact meanings are still debated, which is part of their mystery. They may have been connected to ritual, status, ancestors, or ideas about heaven and earth. What is clear is that jade was more than decoration. It could carry a quiet kind of authority. A small polished object might represent many hours of labor. a family connection, or a belief that life continued beyond what the eye could see. A short pause before we continue. So far, ancient China has not yet become an empire. It is still a wide landscape of early villages, fields, waterworks, pottery, music, and jade. There is something peaceful in this early world. Most changes happen slowly. A seed is planted, a wall is repaired, a vessel is fired, a river is watched. Long before a ruler can command thousands of workers, people first learn how to cooperate with one another and with the seasons. Keep that quiet beginning in mind as bronze, writing, and royal power begin to appear. Fact 11. The Shang dynasty belongs to history and tradition. Chinese historical tradition describes the Shang as an early dynasty that came before the Shang. Archaeologists continue to study sites, such as Liangzhu, in search of clearer connections between written traditions and material evidence. The question is not simply whether a famous name can be neatly onto a ruin. It is how early communities organized power, craft, ritual, and settlement before the surviving written record becomes more secure. The careful uncertainty is important. Archaeology often gives us buildings, tools, graves, and workshops, while later texts give us names and stories. The two do not always fit together perfectly. Ancient history becomes more interesting when we allow some parts to remain open like a distant landscape seen through morning mist. Fact 12. Liangzhu reveals an early Bronze Age center. The site known as Liangzhu in the Yellow River region was a major center during the early Bronze Age. Archaeologists have found large buildings, roads, workshops, elite burials, and early bronze objects. Whether or not it can be matched exactly with the Shang of later tradition, Liangzhu clearly shows a society where power and craft were becoming more concentrated. Skilled workers made valuable objects. Here, leaders oversaw large spaces, and people lived within a settlement more organized than a simple village. The site reminds us that states do not appear suddenly with a trumpet blast. They grow through many smaller changes. More people, more stored food, specialized work, ritual display, and the ability to coordinate labor on a larger scale. Fact 13. Bronze became a language of power. Bronze is made by combining copper with tin, and in ancient China, it became a material of extraordinary importance. Bronze tools and weapons existed, but ceremonial vessels were often the most striking products of the Bronze Age. Their weight, shine, and durability made them suitable for rituals connected to ancestors and rulers. Bronze required organized mining, transport, fuel, furnaces, molds, and skilled workers. A large vessel, therefore, showed more than artistic talent. It showed access to resources and people. When a ruler displayed bronze, the object could quietly announce that a whole network had worked behind it. In this sense, bronze was not only metal, it was a visible record of organization, authority, and remembered ceremony. Fact 14. The Shang dynasty ruled parts of northern China. The Shang dynasty is the earliest Chinese dynasty supported by a large body of surviving written evidence. It ruled parts of northern China during the Bronze Age, and its later capital at Anyang has given archaeologists a remarkable view of royal life. Shang kings conducted rituals, directed warfare, consulted ancestors, and drew power from a network of towns, workshops, and farming communities. The Shang were not the only people living in the region, but their court left an unusually detailed record of its concerns. These records do not tell us everything about every ordinary person. They do, however, let us hear something rare: the questions that rulers asked on particular days long ago, when they wanted the unseen world to answer back. Fact 15. Anyang was a capital of kings, artisans, and scribes. Anyang, also called Liangzhu in connection with the late Shang, was more than a royal residence. It was a working city where artisans cast bronzes, carved bone, made tools, prepared ritual materials, and served the needs of the court. The Smithsonian's work on Anyang highlights its importance as a Shang capital and as the birthplace of the earliest surviving Chinese written records. Archaeologists have found palace foundations, tombs, workshops, and enormous numbers of inscribed bones and shells. All of this gives the place a layered feeling. Behind the king's questions were laborers digging clay, craftspeople heating furnaces, and scribes preparing surfaces. A capital is never only a throne. It is also thousands of hands making daily life possible. Fact 16. Oracle bones were used to ask questions. Shang diviners carved questions onto animal bones, especially ox shoulder blades, and onto turtle shells. Heat was then applied until cracks appeared. A specialist interpreted the cracks, and the question, prediction, and sometimes the outcome could be recorded on the surface. The questions could concern rain, harvests, warfare, childbirth, hunting, illness, or rituals. These objects are called oracle bones because they served as a bridge between the human court and the ancestral or spiritual world. They are striking because they preserve anxiety in such small, direct forms. Will it rain? Will the hunt succeed? Should a ceremony be held? Even a powerful king waited for answers about matters that no one could fully control. Fact 17. The earliest surviving Chinese writing appears on oracle bones. The inscriptions on oracle bones are the earliest substantial body of Chinese writing that survives today. Their characters are ancestors of later Chinese script, though they look different from the forms used now. Writing did not begin as a quiet literary hobby. At Anyang, it was tied closely to ritual, power, record-keeping, and communication with ancestors. Scribes had to know how to cut signs with precision, and their work preserved names, dates, events, and questions that otherwise might have vanished. Because these inscriptions were made for specific occasions, they have an almost intimate quality. A line of writing can bring us close to a moment when someone worried about weather, a royal birth, or the timing of a sacrifice. Fact 18. Shang ritual bronzes were designed for ceremonies. Many Shang bronze vessels were used in ceremonies honoring ancestors. Some held wine, others food, and others water. Their shapes could be both elegant and strange, with handles, legs, lids, animal forms, and intricate surface designs. To modern eyes, a bronze vessel may look like museum art. To the people who used it, it may have been part of a living ritual world. Food and drink were offered, names were remembered, and the bond between the living and the dead was renewed. The vessels could also bear inscriptions, or belong to elite families. Their presence turned a meal into something larger than a meal. It became a meeting place between memory, family duty, and political authority. Fact 19. Piece mold casting gave Chinese bronzes their distinctive forms. Ancient Chinese bronze workers often used a method called piece mold casting. A model was made, clay molds were formed around it in sections, and molten bronze was poured into the space left inside. This method helped craftspeople create vessels with complicated shapes and richly patterned surfaces. It demanded careful planning because the mold pieces had to fit together and the metal had to flow into every part of the design. The final object could be heavy, balanced, and full of tiny details. When you look at an ancient bronze, it is worth imagining the invisible steps behind it. Digging clay, preparing fuel, heating metal, waiting for it to cool, and breaking away the mold. Beauty arrived through a sequence of patient technical decisions. Fact 20. The meaning of the taoti remains uncertain. A dramatic face-like pattern appears on many Shang and Zhou bronzes. It is often called the taoti, a later name applied to a design that may suggest eyes, horns, fangs, or a creature seen from the front. Scholars do not agree on exactly what it meant to the people who first used it. That uncertainty is useful. It reminds us that ancient art does not always provide a simple label for modern viewers. The design may have had links to animals, ritual transformation, protection, power, or the world of spirits. Or it may have held several meanings at once. In the soft light of a bronze surface, the taoti seems to appear and disappear. Perhaps that shifting quality was part of its appeal. Now the scene shifts north toward the Shang world of Anyang, royal tombs, oracle bones and bronze furnaces. Yet even here, beneath the weight of kings and rituals, daily life continues. Someone has to feed the workers, cut the bone, prepare the clay mold, carry the water, and keep the fire alive. Ancient power often looks grand from far away. Up close, it depends on ordinary routines, repeated without applause. Let the distant sound of a workshop fade into the background as we move toward the long age of the Zhou. Fact 21. Ancestors were central to Shang royal life. Shang rulers believed that ancestors could influence the living world. The dead were not simply gone. They remained part of a network of obligation, memory, and communication. Royal rituals asked ancestors for help with harvests, battles, weather, and other urgent matters. This made ancestry a political force as well as a family matter. A king could claim authority partly through his relationship with those who had ruled before him. Offerings, vessels, divination, and tombs all helped maintain this connection. It is easy to think of history as a line moving forward. In Shang ritual life, the past was also present. Earlier generations stood close behind the living, watching, advising, and sometimes needing to be honored with care. Fact 22. Fu Hao was a Shang royal woman of unusual visibility. Fu Hao was a royal consort of the Shang king Wu Ding, and her tomb at Anyang has given historians an unusual view of an elite woman in the late Shang world. Oracle bone inscriptions connect her with military campaigns, rituals, and court affairs. Her tomb contained bronzes, weapons, jades, and other valuable goods. It is important not to assume that every woman in the Shang dynasty held such power. Fu Hao's position was exceptional. Yet her story complicates any simple picture of ancient life in which women were invisible. Her name appears in records, her objects survive, and her tomb shows the ceremonial world around her. Across more than 3,000 years, she remains one of the most clearly known individuals of early China. Fact 23. Chariots changed the movement of elites and armies. Chariots appeared in late Shang China and became important symbols of military and elite power. They required horses, wheels, skilled carpentry, metal fittings, and people trained to work together. A chariot was not simply a vehicle. It was a small, moving system. One person might drive while others fought or carried weapons. On open ground, chariots could offer speed and visibility, while in ceremonial settings they displayed status. Their presence in tombs suggests that they were also linked with beliefs about the afterlife. The careful construction of a wheel, with its spokes and fitted parts, is a small wonder of ancient engineering. It turns raw wood, leather, and metal into movement across the ground. Fact 24. The Zhou replaced the Shang around the 11th century BCE. The Zhou people defeated the Shang and established a dynasty that would last, in one form or another, for centuries. The change was remembered not merely as a military victory, but as a moral event. Later, Zhou thinkers explained that the Shang had lost the right to rule because their last king had become corrupt, while the Zhou had gained that right through virtue. Whether history ever fits such a neat moral lesson is another question. Still, the story mattered enormously because it created a language for thinking about political change. But a ruler did not hold power forever simply because he had inherited it. Heaven, people, and conduct could all become part of the argument about legitimacy. Fact 25. The mandate of heaven explained why dynasties could change. The mandate of heaven was the idea that a ruler governed with heaven's approval, but that approval was not permanent. If a dynasty ruled badly, suffered disasters, ignored the people, or fell into disorder, its loss of power could be understood as a loss of the mandate. This was a powerful idea because it made change imaginable. It did not mean that every rebellion was automatically justified. Rather, it gave later writers a moral framework for explaining why one dynasty rose and another fell. Floods, famine, rebellion, and eclipse could all be read as signs in a larger story. The mandate of heaven made politics feel connected to the order of the cosmos, as though a kingdom and the sky were listening to one another. Fact 26. Zhou rule depended on networks of kinship and loyalty. Early Zhou rulers governed a large area by granting lands and responsibilities to relatives and allies. These local lords were expected to support the royal house with tribute, soldiers, and loyalty. In later times, people sometimes call this feudalism, but the label can hide as much as it reveals. The Zhou system had its own history, Chinese history, and its own changing relationships. What matters is that power had to travel across distance through human ties. A king could not personally inspect every field or settle every dispute. He relied on networks of families, officials, messengers, and local leaders. Rule was therefore not a solid block. It was a web, and every web could stretch, weaken, or pull apart. Fact 27. The Book of Songs preserves voices from the Zhou world. The Book of Songs, also known as the classic of poetry, contains poems connected with the Zhou period. Some are linked with court ceremonies, while others describe love, labor, travel, longing, and the seasonal world. They do not give us a complete record of common life, but they offer something precious. A sense that ancient people noticed birds, plants, riverbanks, marriage, homesickness, and the small emotions of daily existence. In later centuries, the collection became one of the revered classics. Yet many poems remain simple and vivid. A person waits, a cart passes, reeds move in wind. The grandeur of dynasties becomes quieter when set beside a poem that notices dew on grass or a loved one who has not returned. Fact 28. Ritual helped organize Zhou society. For Zhou thinkers, ritual was not only about grand ceremonies. It included the proper ways to greet, mourn, sacrifice, marry, host, speak, and behave in different relationships. The Chinese word li can refer to this wide world of ritual propriety. Its aim was not merely to make life formal. It was to create harmony by giving people shared patterns of conduct. A child, parent, guest, ruler, official, and neighbor each had expected responsibilities. Of course, real life did not always follow the ideal. People argued, competed, and failed. But the ideal itself had a long influence. It suggested that a well-ordered society begins with repeated acts of care, restraint, courtesy, and attention to the people around us. Fact 29. The spring and autumn period was an age of many states. As Zhou royal authority weakened, regional states became more independent. The period known as spring and autumn, named after an old chronicle, saw alliances, rivalries, battles, diplomacy, and constant political change. It can sound like a restless time, yet it also encouraged new forms of thought. Rulers needed advisors. Communities needed ways to understand disorder. Scholars and teachers discussed how a person should live and how a state should be governed. The ancient Chinese world was becoming more connected, but also more competitive. Roads and rivers carried goods, messages, armies, and ideas. In that sense, uncertainty created an opening. When old structures no longer felt secure, people began asking what a better order might look like. Fact 30. The Warring States period encouraged powerful reforms. During the Warring States period, several large states competed for survival and dominance. Armies grew, governments became more organized, and rulers looked for practical ways to increase food production, taxes, and military strength. This was not peaceful history, but it was also an age of remarkable intellectual and technical development. States built irrigation works, improved administration, and drew talent into public service. Philosophers offered rival solutions to the same problem. How can people live well when the world feels unstable? The answer depended on whom you asked. Some valued virtue, some law, some natural balance, and some universal concern. The competition of states became a competition of ideas, leaving behind arguments that are still read today. The Zhou world did not stay still. Royal power became weaker. Local states became stronger, and the map filled with competing courts. This could have made the age feel only violent and unsettled, but it also made people think. When old answers no longer seemed enough, teachers and advisors began asking what good government, good friendship, and a good life might mean. The next part of our journey is filled with ideas, but there is no need to hold them tightly. Let them arrive like calm voices in a room, each offering a different way to see the world. Fact 31. Iron tools widened the possibilities of farming. Iron did not appear everywhere at once, and bronze remained important for many purposes. Still, the spread of iron tools during the later Zhou period made a difference in agriculture and warfare. Iron could be used for axes, blades, and farming implements, allowing people to work certain soils and clear certain lands more effectively. The change was gradual, not magical. A tool only helps when people know how to make it, repair it, and use it in the right place. But over time, improved tools supported larger harvests and populations. There is something restful about this kind of history. A great change may begin with no grand announcement at all, only a sharper edge held in a farmer's hand at the start of another planting season. Fact 32. Ancient Chinese money came in many shapes. Before round coins with square holes became common, ancient Chinese states used forms of money shaped like tools, including spades and knives. These objects were cast in bronze and reflected older, familiar tools of daily work. Their shapes remind us that money begins with trust. A small piece of metal has value because people agree that it can stand for grain, cloth, labor, or other goods. As states became more organized, they tried to control coinage and create more regular systems of exchange. A coin can seem ordinary, but it carries a whole world inside it. Mines, furnaces, markets, taxes, travel, and the quiet agreement of strangers who may never meet again. Fact 33. Irrigation could turn difficult land into productive land. Water management became one of the great arts of ancient Chinese states. Canals, ditches, dams, and embankments helped move water toward fields or away from dangerous floods. The famous Dujiangyan irrigation system in Sichuan, begun in the Warring States period, is often remembered for guiding river water without using a single large dam across the main flow. Such projects required observation of local landscapes and the ability to organize labor over time. Water engineering was never only technical. It affected food, taxes, settlement, and political power. A channel cut through earth could feed thousands of people. In the right season, the slow sound of water moving through a field may have been as important to a community as the voice of any ruler. Fact 34. Confucius lived in a time of political uncertainty. Confucius, known in Chinese as Kongzi, lived during the late spring and autumn period. He was a teacher and advisor whose ideas later became deeply influential in China and beyond. Confucius did not present himself as someone inventing wisdom from nothing. He looked back to earlier traditions of ritual, learning, and moral responsibility, then asked how they might guide a troubled world. His central concern was often practical. How should a person act toward parents, friends, rulers, and neighbors? He believed that character mattered and that good government depended on people who cultivated it. The power of his teaching lies partly in its calm scale. It begins not with conquering the world, but with learning to behave well in the relationships close at hand. Fact 35. The Analects preserve sayings linked to Confucius and his students. The Analects is a collection of short conversations and sayings associated with Confucius and later followers. It was compiled over time rather than written as a single book by one person sitting down to explain everything. Its style can feel like overhearing brief moments of teaching. A student asks a question. The teacher answers in a way that is sometimes direct, sometimes puzzling, and sometimes tailored to the person listening. This makes the book feel alive. It does not always give neat definitions. Instead, it returns again and again to learning, ritual, humanity, loyalty, honesty, and self-cultivation. The small scenes invite a quiet kind of reading, because each line can be turned over in the mind like a smooth stone. Fact 36. Filial care became an important moral ideal. Filial piety, often called Shao, refers broadly to respect and care within family relationships, especially toward parents and ancestors. In ancient Chinese thought, family was often seen as the first school of moral life. A person who could not show care, gratitude, or responsibility at home might not be trusted with larger duties in society. This ideal could take many forms, including obedience, remembrance, support in old age, and proper mourning. Like all ideals, it could be interpreted differently in different times and households. Still, its influence was lasting. It connected private feeling with public ethics. The way a person treated those closest to them was imagined as a small pattern that could extend outward, from family to village, from village to state. Fact 37. Ritual propriety was meant to train the heart as well as the body. Confucian thinkers did not see ritual as empty decoration. Repeated gestures could shape feelings and habits. Bowing at the right moment, speaking with restraint, serving food carefully, or mourning with seriousness were ways of practicing respect until it became part of one's character. And Daoist. This is one of the gentlest ideas in ancient philosophy. Behavior can educate emotion. A person may not wake up fully wise, but they can learn through small acts performed again and again. Ritual could also create a shared rhythm in a community, helping people know what was expected of them. In a world of changing rulers and uncertain politics, the ordinary pattern of courtesy offered a kind of anchor, like a familiar path used at dusk. Fact 38. Daoist. Thought asked people to notice the natural way. Daoist traditions offered a different kind of wisdom, from the orderliness emphasized by many Confucian thinkers. The Tao, often translated as the way, refers to the underlying course or pattern of the world. Daoist texts encourage people to notice nature, avoid needless force, and question rigid ambition. This did not mean doing nothing at all. It meant acting with sensitivity to circumstances, like water finding a path around a stone. The image of water became especially important because it is soft, yielding, and yet able to shape the strongest ground over time. Daoist thought can feel peaceful because it asks the restless mind to loosen its grip. Not every problem needs to be pushed. Some things become clearer when they are allowed to settle. Fact 39. The Tao Te Ching is brief, but full of paradox. The Tao Te Ching is a foundational Daoist text, traditionally associated with Liangzhu, though its authorship and formation are more complex than a single ancient author story suggests. Its short passages speak in paradoxes. What is soft may overcome what is hard. What is empty may be useful. What is low may nourish what is high. The book does not offer a simple manual for life. It invites the reader to see ordinary ideas from another angle. A cup is useful because of its empty space. A valley receives water because it lies low. These images have lasted because they are easy to picture and difficult to finish thinking about. They ask for patience, and patience is a good companion at the end of a long day. Fact 40. Zhuangzi used stories to make fixed ideas feel less certain. The text known as the Zhuangzi is associated with the thinker, Zhou, and later writers. It is filled with stories, jokes, strange transformations, and conversations between animals, craftsmen, rulers, and sages. One famous story asks whether Zhuangzi dreamed that he was a butterfly, or whether a butterfly dreamed that it was Zhuangzi. The point is not to solve the riddle once and for all. It is to loosen the mind's certainty about the boundaries it draws. The Zhuangzi often celebrates freedom from narrow pride and rigid labels. Its world is playful, spacious, and full of change. In that world, even a small creature can become a teacher, and a dream can remind us that reality is larger than our first explanation. By now, the ancient Chinese world has become a landscape of schools and arguments. One teacher emphasizes ritual, another speaks of water and the natural way. Another asks people to care more widely. Another wants clear laws and strong institutions. These debates may seem distant, but their questions are close to anyone who has ever wondered how to live with other people. For the moment, let the arguments soften. We are about to see how one ambitious state, Qin, turned many competing kingdoms into a single empire. Fact 41. Mohist thinkers argued for broad concern. The followers of Mozi offered another powerful response to the problems of their age. They criticized costly rituals and aggressive warfare, and they argued for a principle, sometimes translated as impartial care or universal concern. The idea was not that people would feel exactly the same affection for everyone. Rather, it challenged the habit of treating outsiders as if their suffering did not matter. Mohist thinkers also valued practical skill, defense, and careful reasoning. Their communities were known for helping defend cities under attack. This mixture is striking, an ethical call for wider concern, joined to a very practical interest in engineering and strategy. It shows how lively ancient Chinese debate could be, with different schools offering different maps for the same difficult world. Fact 42. Legalist thinkers stressed clear law and strong institutions. Legalist thought argued that a state could not rely only on the personal virtue of rulers and officials. It needed clear laws, rewards, punishments, and systems that made behavior predictable. In a time of competition among states, this approach appealed to rulers who wanted efficiency and control. Legalism is sometimes remembered only for harshness, and its historical use could indeed be severe. Yet its basic question was practical. How can a government function when people may not always be wise or good? The answer was to create institutions that guide behavior through incentives and consequences. Ancient China never followed one philosophy alone. Confucian, Daoist, Mohist, and legalist ideas often met, argued, and later blended in surprising ways. Fact 43. The art of war treats conflict as a problem of judgment. The art of war is traditionally associated with Sun Tzu, or Sun Tzu. Its exact origins and authorship are debated, but the text became one of the most influential works on strategy in East Asia. It does not simply praise fighting. Again and again, it emphasizes knowledge, timing, terrain, preparation, and the importance of avoiding costly mistakes. The best outcome, in its famous logic, is often the one that wins without a long battle. The book's language has traveled far beyond military settings because it speaks about planning under uncertainty. A person must see what is changing, understand their own limits, and avoid being ruled by impulse. Even in a noisy world, that old advice has a calm center. Pause, observe, and do not rush blindly forward. Fact 44. The 100 schools of thought were not a single school. The phrase 100 schools of thought is used to describe the rich intellectual life of the later Zhou period. The number 100 is not a precise count. It suggests abundance. Teachers traveled between courts, students debated rivals, and rulers listened for ideas that might make their states stronger or more peaceful. Some thinkers focused on ethics, some on logic, some on farming, military defense, government, names, language, or nature. Not every book survived, and not every school had the same influence. But the period left a deep impression because it showed philosophy growing in response to real social pressure. Ideas were not floating above the world. They were being tested against famine, war, family duty, and the problem of how strangers might live together. Fact 45. Shang's reforms helped make Qin powerful. The state of Qin began on the western edge of the Zhou world, but over time it became one of the strongest competitors in the Warring States period. Reforms associated with the minister Shang helped organize Qin around agriculture, military service, law, and administrative control. The reforms could be strict, and they reduced the power of older aristocratic families. In return, the state gained more direct ways to reward service and mobilize resources. Qin's rise was not caused by one person alone. Geography, leadership, farming, military methods, and many local choices all mattered. Still, the reforms show how a state can become powerful by changing the rules of ordinary life, from how land is worked to how advance is earned. Fact 46. Qin united many rival states in 221 BCE. In 221 BCE, the ruler of Qin completed a series of conquests that brought the major warring states under one imperial government. This was a dramatic political shift. For centuries, the region had been divided among competing states. Now, one court claimed authority over a much larger territory. Unification did not make every difference disappear. Local customs, languages, and landscapes remained. But the Qin state could issue rules, build roads, standardize measures, and move officials across a wider realm than before. The moment has a strong place in history because it created a modern empire that later dynasties would inherit, revise, and argue over. A map that once looked fractured now began to imagine itself as a single political space. Fact 47. Qin Shi Huang took a new imperial title. The Qin ruler who achieved unification called himself Qin Shi Huang, the first emperor of Qin. The title was designed to sound greater than king. It announced not merely rule over one state, but a new order for all under heaven. Titles matter because they shape what people think is possible. By naming himself first emperor, Qin Shi Huang suggested that this was the beginning of a line meant to continue for generations. The Qin dynasty itself would not last long, but the imperial title endured. Later, rulers continued to call themselves emperors, and the idea of a unified empire became part of the political imagination. One carefully chosen phrase helped create a form of rule that would echo for more than 2,000 years. Fact 48. Qin standardized writing, weights, measures, and coinage. After unification, the Qin government promoted standards for writing, weights, measures, and coinage. The aim was practical. Merchants, officials, builders, and tax collectors could work more easily when they used agreed forms. Standardization did not erase every local variation overnight, but it gave the empire a common administrative language, A written character, a cart, axle, a measuring vessel, or a coin could become part of a larger system. This is one of the less dramatic sides of empire, yet it is often the most lasting. Great conquests may capture attention, but daily life depends on whether people can count grain, record land, carry messages, and understand official instructions. Order often arrives in small, repeatable units. Fact 49. Qin roads helped bind the empire together. The Qin state built and improved roads that allowed officials, troops, messengers, and supplies to move across the empire. Roads are simple things in one sense. Packed earth, bridges, maintenance, direction. Yet their effects can be enormous. A message that travels faster changes how a ruler governs. A road that carries grain changes how an army survives. A path that links a village to a market changes what farmers can sell and buy. Qin roads were part of a larger effort to make distant places answerable to the center. But roads also have lives beyond government. Once built, they carry travelers, rumors, songs, goods, and new ideas. A road begins as policy and becomes a thread in the fabric of ordinary human movement. Fact 50. The Zhengguo Canal brought water to Qin farmland. The Zhengguo Canal, begun before unification in the Qin state, was a major irrigation project that helped bring water from the Jing River to fertile lands in the Guangdong region, the Guangdong region. Its construction was difficult, involving long channels and careful control of water across an uneven landscape. The project is remembered partly because it increased agricultural productivity in a region that supported Qin's rise. This is a quiet form of power. Armies are visible, but harvests sustain them. A canal can make an empire possible without ever appearing in a royal portrait. It is simply there, carrying water through fields, season after season. Ancient states depended on such systems more than they depended on speeches, because food was the foundation beneath every ambitious plan. The Qin Empire moves quickly across the historical stage. Roads are laid out. Measures are standardized. Water is guided through canals. Old walls are connected and expanded. The result is impressive, but it is also heavy. A large state can make movement and communication easier, yet it can ask a great deal from the people who live beneath it. As we continue, keep both sides of that picture in mind. The order made possible by organization, and the human cost that can hide behind a perfect plan. Fact 51. The Great Wall was built in many times, not all at once. The Great Wall is often imagined as one uninterrupted structure built by a single emperor. The reality is more complicated. Different states built northern defensive walls before the Qin dynasty. After unification, Qin Shi Huang's government connected and extended some existing fortifications, while later dynasties built, rebuilt, and altered walls in different places. UNESCO notes that major construction continued into the Ming period, long after ancient Qin and Han times. The wall was therefore a changing frontier system rather than one simple line. It included earthworks, watchtowers, passes, garrisons, and routes through difficult land. Its size is impressive, but its deeper story is about borders, where states tried to define safety, movement, taxation, and the uncertain edge between settled fields and open steppe. Fact 52. The terracotta army guarded the first emperor's tomb complex. Near the mausoleum of Qin Shi Huang, archaeologists discovered thousands of life-sized terracotta figures, including soldiers, horses, and chariots. The figures were arranged in formations that suggest an army prepared to serve the emperor after death. They are famous because each face appears varied, though the figures were made through a sophisticated combination of standardized parts and individual finishing. The army was not a decoration, placed in a small tomb chamber. It was part of a vast burial complex, designed to mirror aspects of the emperor's world. Looking at the ranks of clay soldiers, it is hard not to feel the scale of labor behind them. Thousands of hands shaped earth into an eternal guard that waited in darkness for more than 2 millennia. Fact 53. The first emperor's mausoleum was designed like a world. The tomb complex of Qin Shi Huang was much more than a burial pit. UNESCO describes it as a vast archaeological landscape centered on the emperor's mausoleum, with terracotta figures, horses, chariots, weapons, and structures that reflected the urban plan of the imperial capital. Ancient accounts describe a burial chamber imagined as a miniature universe, though the central mound has not been fully excavated. Whether every detail in those accounts is exact or not, the overall idea is clear. The emperor's afterlife was planned on a grand scale. A ruler who had unified a kingdom expected death not to end his world completely. The tomb became an attempt to carry order, protection, and status across the final boundary. Fact 54. Qin rule was powerful but brief. The Qin dynasty lasted only from 221 to 206 BCE, a short time compared with many later dynasties. Its laws, labor demands, and centralized control created strength, but they also produced resentment and strain. After the first emperor died, rebellion and political conflict quickly weakened the dynasty. The speed of its fall became a lesson for later historianisms. A state could unify a vast territory and still fail to make that unity feel bearable. Qin left behind durable institutions, standards, and the imperial model, yet its own dynasty disappeared almost as quickly as it had risen. This is one of history's quiet paradoxes. Something can be short-lived and still shape the future deeply, like a flash of lightning that reveals the whole landscape for a moment. Fact 55. The Han dynasty built on Qin foundations. The Han dynasty, the Qi, and ruled for centuries. The Qin meant interruptions between the Western Bechuans and Eastern's Shang. Han rulers did not simply copy Qin methods. They softened some policies, made new alliances, and developed their own institutions. Yet they also kept the basic idea of a centralized empire, with officials, laws, roads, taxes, and a ruler at the center. This mixture of change and continuity is one reason the Han became so influential in later memory. The name Han itself remains connected with ideas of Chinese cultural identity today, though ancient society was always diverse and changing. The Han story is not one smooth age of peace. It includes conflict, expansion, court intrigue, creativity, and long efforts to make a large empire work. Fact 56. Chang'an was one of the great capitals of the ancient world. Chang'an, near present-day Xi'an, served as the Western Han capital and became one of the major cities of the ancient world. Its avenues, markets, palaces, workshops, and administrative buildings gathered people from many parts of the empire and beyond. A capital can feel distant when we picture it only as a place of emperors. But Chang'an was also a city of cooks, artisans, guards, merchants, scribes, servants, farmers bringing produce, and travelers arriving with unfamiliar accents. Its scale depended on constant movement. Grain entering, waste leaving, messages crossing, and officials recording. At night, after gates were closed and markets quieted, the city would still have held thousands of private lives behind walls and courtyards, each one carrying its own hopes and worries. Fact 57. The Han divided its history into Western and Eastern periods. The Han dynasty is often divided into the Western Han, from 206 BCE to 9 CE, and the Eastern Han from 25 to 220 CE. Between them came the short-lived Xin dynasty of Wang Mang. The shift also involved a move of the capital from Chang'an to Luoyang. These dates can seem like a dry shelf of labels, but they help us notice that even a long-lived dynasty changes over time. Institutions age, powerful families rise, borders shift. Old plans are revised. The Han that, big after, the Qin, was not identical to the Han that ended centuries later. This is true of every long human story. Continuity is never stillness. It is a river that keeps its name while its water is always moving. Fact 58. Han officials were chosen through recommendation and learning. The famous competitive civil service examination system belongs mainly to later Chinese history. During the Han, officials were often recruited through recommendation, reputation, family connections, local office, and demonstrated learning. Box. One important ideal was that worthy and filial men should be recognized and brought into service. In practice, power and privilege still mattered greatly. Yet the principle that government needed educated, morally cultivated officials became increasingly important. The Kolmo Antonad. It created a link between learning and public life that would grow stronger over centuries. A good official was expected to write, judge, advise, and manage, but also to embody certain ethical standards. The hope was that an empire could be steadied not only by force, but by people trained to think carefully before acting. Fact 59. Confucian classics became central to Han political culture. During the Han dynasty, Confucian learning gained a major place in official political culture. The classics associated with earlier traditions were studied, interpreted, and used to discuss proper government, family duty, ritual, and history. This did not mean every Han official agreed on every idea, or that other traditions disappeared. Legal methods, cosmological beliefs, local custom concerns all remained important. We, but Confucian language gave many officials a shared way to talk about virtue and the responsibilities of rulers. A government decision could be discussed, not only in terms of profit or power, but in terms of moral example. The empire was imagined as a family-like order, with the ruler expected to set a tone that traveled outward through officials and households. Fact 60. Bamboo and silk carried texts before paper became common. Before paper was widely used, many Chinese texts were written on strips of bamboo or wood tied together with cords. Important documents could also be written on silk, which was light and elegant but expensive. Bamboo strips made books feel very different from modern pages. A long text could be a bundle of narrow pieces, each carrying a line of writing. The material affected how people read, stored, and moved information. Writing was never separate from its surface. A scribe needed ink, brush, strips, order, and care. The physical weight of a text could be considerable. When paper later became more available, it changed the practical life of writing. Yet the older bamboo and silk traditions remind us that knowledge once had to be carried one strip at a time. With the Han dynasty, the empire becomes older, more layered, and more settled in its habits. Capitals grow. Officials write reports, texts are copied, silk is woven. Paper becomes more useful. The great political events are still there, but ancient life also becomes visible in smaller ways. A strip of bamboo, a lacquer cup, a bronze coin, a bundle of grain. These ordinary things are the soft furniture of history. They tell us how people carried information, stored food, exchanged goods, and tried to make life more comfortable. Fact 61. Paper was improved and spread during the Han era. Paper existed in China before the famous court official Cai Lun. But later, historical accounts credit Cai Lun in the early 2nd century CE with improving papermaking by using materials such as bark, hemp, waste, rags, and old fishing nets. Whatever the precise role of one person, the larger change was real. Paper became an increasingly useful writing surface. It was lighter and often less costly than silk and easier to manage than many bamboo strips. Over time, paper would transform administration, literature, education, art, and memory. It is easy to overlook because paper feels ordinary now. But imagine the relief of carrying a written report on flexible sheets rather than on a heavy bundle of wood. A simple fiber mat made it easier for ideas to travel. Fact 62. Sima Qian wrote a history on an enormous scale. Sima Qian was a Han court historian, whose records of the grand historian became of the great works of Chinese historical writing. Lister. It traced events and figures from legendary early rulers through his own time, bringing together biographies, chronologies, treatises, and accounts of states and peoples. Sima Qian's work was not merely a list of dates. It asked what kind of choices people make, how power changes hands, and why success can turn into failure. His personal story is also remembered for the hardship he endured after criticizing an imperial decision. He continued writing, leaving behind a work that made the past feel populated by real people with ambitions, mistakes, courage, and fear. History, in his hands, became a long human conversation rather than a row of monuments. Fact 63. Silk was both a fabric and a complex craft. Silk comes from the cocoons of silkworms, but turning it into cloth requires a whole chain of careful work. Add, mulberry trees must be grown to feed the worms. Cocoons must be gathered. Fine threads must be unwound, twisted, dyed, and woven. In ancient China, silk was valued for its beauty, lightness, and labor. It could be worn given as a gift, used in ritual, and exchanged as a form of wealth. Silk also became famous far beyond China, helping give later trade routes their familiar name. Yet before it traveled across deserts, it began in quiet places. Leaves gathered, cocoons tended, threads drawn out by patient hands. A luxury cloth was built from small repeated acts of attention. Fact 64. The Silk Roads were networks, not one road. The phrase Silk Road can make us imagine one straight path leading from China to the Mediterranean. In reality, the Silk Roads were many connected land and sea routes used over long periods by merchants, envoys, pilgrims, soldiers, and travelers. Goods moved in stages, often passing through many hands. Silk was important, but so were horses, metals, glass, spices, ideas, artistic styles, and religious traditions. The routes changed with politics, climate, and local control. A caravan did not carry the whole world in one journey. It carried a small part of it to the next stopping place. This is a gentle way to picture global history. Not as one sudden meeting, but as a slow exchange, happening step by step across mountain passes, oases, rivers, and markets. Fact 65. Zhang Shan's journey helped open Han contacts to the West. During the reign of Emperor Wu of Han, the envoy Zhang Qian was sent westward in search of allies against the Xiongnu. He was captured for years, escaped, and eventually returned with information about regions far beyond the Han frontier. UNESCO describes his diplomatic mission as a milestone in the history of Eurasian cultural interchange. Zhang Qian did not create every route by himself, because people had traveled and traded across Central Asia long before. But his reports helped the Han court understand a wider world of states, horses, goods, and possibilities. His story feels almost like a dream of distance. One person leaves home, crosses unknown lands, and returns carrying a map of places that had previously existed only as rumors. Fact 66. Horses from Central Asia mattered to the Han court. The Han dynasty valued strong horses from Central Asia, especially for military use against powerful steppe rivals. These animals were admired for endurance and speed, and they became part of a wider exchange between the Han world and communities to the west. Horses are a reminder that trade is often driven by need as much as luxury. A bolt of silk may be beautiful, but a horse can change the movement of soldiers, messages, and supplies. The desire for better horses encouraged diplomacy, conflict, and long-distance contact. In this way, a grazing animal became part of imperial strategy. Somewhere on a distant plain, a horse's steady breath and hooves could influence decisions made in a palace far to the east. Fact 67. The Xiongnu were powerful neighbors of the Han. North of the Han frontier, the Xiongnu formed a powerful confederation of steppe peoples. Relations between Han rulers and Xiongnu leaders included war, trade, diplomacy, marriage alliances, tribute, and uneasy peace. It is important not to treat the steppe simply as an empty space beyond civilization. The steppe had its own political networks, mobile economies, and military strength. Han China and the Xiongnu shaped one another through long contact. Frontier history is rarely a simple line between inside and outside. People crossed borders, exchanged goods, served in armies, and carried news in both directions. A frontier is not only a wall. It is also a meeting place where different ways of living watch, learn from, and compete with one another. Fact 68. The Han government debated salt and iron. Salt and iron were essential resources in Han life. Salt preserved food and supported daily diets, while iron was needed for tools and weapons. At different times, the Han's government controlled or taxed these industries closely, leading to famous debates about whether state monopolies were wise. The discussions recorded in the law discourses on salt and iron show officials arguing about profit, morality, defense, farming, and the burden on ordinary people. This is surprisingly modern in feeling. Governments still debate how much control they should have over important resources. The ancient conversation tells us that economic questions are never only about numbers. They are also about fairness, security, and what kind of life leaders think their people should be able to live. Fact 69. Han ironworkers produced both useful tools and weapons. Han China developed impressive ironworking, including techniques for casting iron and making a wide range of tools. Iron plows, axes, knives, and other implements could improve everyday work, while weapons supported the military needs of the state. Technical knowledge does not always look glamorous in the archaeological record. A rusted tool may not draw the same attention as a gold ornament. Yet tools quietly shape the boundaries of what people can do. They affect how land is cleared, how wood is cut, how buildings rise, and how food is prepared. In this sense, ironworking belongs to the history of ordinary strength. It turned heat, ore, and skill into objects that joined people to the earth through their daily labor. Fact 70. Granaries helped states prepare for uncertain seasons. Ancient governments paid close attention to grain because grain was food, tax revenue, emergency relief, and military supply all at once. Granaries allowed grain to be stored from good harvests and used when crops failed or armies needed support. Storage did not remove the danger of famine, and it could be managed unfairly. Still, the very idea of a granary shows a society trying to think beyond the present moment. Grain had to be measured, guarded, dried, and moved before it spoiled. Officials needed records, farmers needed confidence The taxes would not leave them hungry. A granary was therefore more than a building. It was a bet on the future, made from countless bundles of harvested grain, waiting quietly in the dark. A long empire is held together by practical things. Grain must be stored, tools must be made, markets must be supplied, rivers and roads must carry people and goods. The next few facts are about that quieter machinery of life. There may be no dramatic battle in a granary or a marketplace. Yet these places decide whether a city can eat, whether a family can trade, and whether a government can continue. Imagine the soft weight of a coin in the hand, the scent of grain in a storehouse, and the low murmur of a market at first light. Fact 71. Markets made cities lively and complicated. Han cities had markets where people bought and sold food, cloth, tools, animals, pottery, metal goods, and luxury items. Pocket marketplaces brought together farmers, traders, artisans, officials, visitors, and people who lived by small services. They were places of opportunity, but also places that governments wanted to regulate. Prices, weights, permits, taxes, and public order all mattered. A market lets us imagine the sound of ancient life more clearly than a palace sometimes does. Bargaining voices, animals, carts, food being cooked, cloth unfolding, coins changing hands. Every object in a market had a story behind it. A bowl came from a kiln, a rope came from plant fiber, a fish came from a river. A market gathered all those separate stories into one busy morning. Fact 72. The Wushu coin became a long-lasting Han standard. The Han dynasty used a round bronze coin with a square hole in the center, known as the Wushu coin. Versions of this coin remained important for centuries, making it one of the enduring forms of Chinese money. The square hole was practical because coins could be strung together on cords for counting and carrying. Its shape also became visually familiar. Round outside, square within. Some later thinkers saw symbolic echoes in that form, linking roundness with heaven and squareness with earth. Though coins were first of all practical tools of exchange, a small coin may seem too humble to carry history. Yet, when thousands are found together, they reveal markets, taxes, wages, savings, travel, and the daily movement of trust through an empire. Fact 73. Han tombs were built as homes for the dead. Many Han tombs were designed with chambers that resemble parts of a household. They could include rooms, doors, wells, granaries, kitchens, and objects for eating, sleeping, working, or entertaining. This reflects a belief that the dead continued to need care and comfort in some form. Tombs also preserve social rank. An elite burial could contain elaborate goods, while more modest graves still show efforts to provide for the departed. The result is a moving archaeological record. A miniature stove or model pigpen can tell us as much about everyday hopes as a grand statue. The world of the dead was imagined through the familiar world of the living, with its food, tools, rooms, and the wish that home might continue beyond the last breath. Fact 74. Mingqi were objects made for tombs. Mingqi is a term used for objects placed in tombs to serve the dead. In Han burials, these could include miniature houses, watchtowers, animals, servants, musicians, granaries, stoves, and other models. They were often made of clay, which allowed families to create a rich symbolic world without burying every real object. These figures are sometimes called spirit goods. They offer archaeologists a valuable view of what people considered useful, desirable, or protective in the afterlife. A tiny clay dog, chicken, or cooking vessel can feel unexpectedly tender. It suggests that even in death, people imagined a life made bearable by familiar things. The grand language of empire becomes quieter beside a miniature pigpen waiting in a tomb chamber. Fact 75. Some Han elites were buried in jade suits. A small number of Han royal and elite burials contained suits made from thousands of jade plaques sewn together with threads of gold, silver, copper, or silk. These suits were extremely costly and reflect beliefs that jade could protect or preserve the body. Not everyone had such a burial. They belonged to a narrow, elite world. Yet, they show the extraordinary value or Daoist on jade, and the deep concern people felt about the boundary between life and death. A jade suit turns a human body into a shimmering pattern of small stones, each cut and fitted by hand. It is an object of luxury, but also of vulnerability. Beneath all the wealth lies the same human hope, that something precious might endure. Fact 76. Lacquerware combined beauty with patient craftsmanship. Lacquerware was made by applying many thin layers of sap from lacquer trees to a surface, often wood. The process required time, drying, polishing, and skill. Han lacquer objects could be light, durable, and richly colored, with red, black, gold, and painted designs. Bowls, cups, boxes, and trays were transformed into surfaces of quiet shine. Lacquer shows another side of ancient craft. Unlike bronze, it is not heavy or loud. Its beauty comes from repetition and patience. One layer dries, then another is added. The maker waits, smooths, and continues. In this way, a small cup can contain months of attention. It becomes a lesson in how careful work can turn an everyday object into something graceful enough to outlast its owner. Fact 77. Music was part of ritual, court life, and daily culture. Music mattered deeply in ancient China. It was used in ceremonies, banquets, court performances, and private life. Confucian thinkers often treated music as a force that could shape emotion and a social harmony when used well. Instruments included bells, drums, flutes, strings, and mouth organs. Music was not merely entertainment. It could mark the right time for a rite, coordinate dances, honor ancestors, or create a sense of order in a gathering. Of course, we cannot hear most ancient performances exactly as they sounded. But instruments, written descriptions, and archaeological finds give us traces. A set of bells or a bone flute reminds us that people long ago also wanted sound to carry feeling, to gather people together, and to make time feel different for a while. Fact 78. Bronze bell sets could produce carefully tuned notes. Ancient Chinese bronze bell sets, called bianzhong, are among the most remarkable musical objects of the ancient world. Individual bells could produce two distinct pitches depending on where they were struck. Sets of bells were arranged by size and tone, allowing complex music to be performed in court and ritual settings. Their discovery shows that ancient musicians and craftspeople understood sound with great precision. A bell is an object of metal and emptiness. Its shape decides its voice. When many bells hang together, they form a kind of bronze landscape of sound. Even now, hearing reconstructed performances can feel surprising. These heavy ancient objects do not only sit in museums, they still carry the possibility of music, waiting for a careful hand to wake them. Fact 79. The kin became a symbol of quiet cultivation. The chin, often called the guqin today, is a long zither associated with scholars, poets, and cultivated private life. Its history reaches back into ancient China, though the instrument changed over time. Compared with large ceremonial bell sets, the kin suggests a more intimate sound world. It was played by one person, often in a quiet room or garden, with subtle tones and pauses as important as loud notes. Later traditions connected the kin with reflection, friendship, and the pursuit of inner balance. That association fits the instrument's gentle character. A single plucked string can fade slowly into silence. In that fading sound, it is easy to imagine an ancient listener sitting near a window, allowing the noise of the outside world to become less urgent. Fact 80. Ancient astronomers watched the sky with great care. Chinese astronomers observed the movements of the sun, moon, planets, stars, and comets for practical and symbolic reasons. The calendar depended on accurate observation, while unusual events in the sky could be treated as signs relevant to the ruler and the state. Carpenters, astronomers kept records because a well-governed empire was often imagined as being in harmony with heaven. An eclipse, comet, or unexpected planetary motion could therefore become more than a scientific event. It could also become a political question. The sky offered a vast screen on which people read order and change. Night after night, observers watched points of light move in patterns too slow for a single person to fully own. Their records became a bridge between short human lives and long celestial cycles. The material world of ancient China was never separate from sound, time, and the sky. A bronze bell could mark a ceremony. A calendar could organize a harvest. A water clock could make an hour visible. An astronomer could look upward and search for order in movements beyond human control. As the night grows quieter around you, these old ways of measuring the world may feel strangely gentle. A bell fades, water rises. The moon changes shape. People notice, record, and try to understand. Fact 81. The Chinese calendar balanced moon and sun. Ancient Chinese calendars were lunisolar. Months followed the phases of the moon, while adjustments were made to keep the year aligned with the seasons and the sun. This balance mattered because farming, ritual, taxation, and government all depended on knowing when the year was turning. A calendar is not only a way to label days. It is a social agreement about when to plant, when to harvest, when to mourn, when to celebrate, and when officials should act. In an empire spread across many landscapes, shared time was a form of coordination. The new moon became more than a shape in the sky. It became a signal that households, markets, temples, and courts could recognize together, even when they were far apart. Fact 82. Zhou designed an early earthquake detector. The Han scholar Zhang is traditionally credited with designing a remarkable device that could indicate the direction of a distant earthquake. Historical descriptions portray a bronze vessel decorated with dragons and toads. When an earthquake occurred, a mechanism inside would release a ball from one dragon's mouth into the mouth of a toad below, pointing toward the source. The original device has not survived, and historians still discuss exactly how it worked. Even so, the story is important because it shows a serious effort to understand natural events through instruments rather than rumor alone. An earthquake could be terrifying, especially if felt far from its origin. Zhong's device tried to make the hidden movement of the earth visible in a calm, mechanical way. Fact 83. The 9 chapters on mathematical art collected practical problems. The 9 chapters on mathematical art is an ancient Chinese mathematical text compiled over time, probably reaching its familiar form around the early imperial period. It includes problems about land measurement, taxation, grain, wages, fractions, equations, and engineering. The mathematics is practical because it grew from real needs. How much grain fits in a storehouse? How can land be divided? How should a tax be calculated? The book shows that numbers were part of ordinary administration and craft, not only abstract thought. Mathematical problems can seem dry until we remember what they represented. Fields, food, labor, and fairness. A calculation written on bamboo strips might determine how a community shared burdens or how a builder planned a wall. Numbers were a quiet language for making the world manageable. Fact 84. Water clocks helped people measure passing hours. Water clocks used the steady flow of water to mark time. Different forms existed in ancient China, including vessels that filled or emptied at controlled rates. Timekeeping mattered for astronomy, official schedules, rituals, and daily coordination. A water clock does not tick like a modern clock. It drips, flows, and changes level. Its rhythm is softer, closer to the movement of a small stream. Measuring time in this way required attention to temperature, flow, and the shape of containers. Even a simple device shows how ancient people turned a natural process into a shared measure. The hours still passed as they always had, but the water clock gave them form. It made the invisible movement of a day visible in a rising line of water. Fact 85. Ancient Chinese medicine linked the body with balance. Texts associated with early Chinese medicine often describe health in terms of balance, patterns, and relationships within the body and between the body and its environment. The Huangdi Neijing, compiled over time in the early imperial era, became an influential collection of medical ideas. It discusses topics such as pulse, seasons, diet, and the flow of vital processes. Modern medicine does not accept all ancient explanations, but the historical importance of these texts is undeniable. They show people trying to make sense of illness through careful observation and broad systems of thought. For ancient healers, a person was not separate from weather, food, sleep, and emotion. The body was seen as a small world, sensitive to the larger world around it. Fact 86. Han medical manuscripts preserve practical observations. Medical manuscripts found in early Chinese tombs reveal a wide range of concerns, from remedies and exercises to descriptions of the body and methods of treatment. These texts remind us that healing knowledge was not confined to one single tradition or one famous book. It circulated in households, among specialists, and through written collections that were copied and adapted. Some ideas may seem strange now, while others show close attention to symptoms, diet, movement, and the effects of seasons. The manuscripts are valuable because they bring us near the practical side of ancient care. Someone was worrying about pain, fever, childbirth, digestion, or sleep. The questions were very human, even when the answers belonged to a different world of knowledge. Fact 87. Buddhism entered China through long-distance contacts. Buddhism reached China during the Han era through contacts across Central Asia, though its influence would grow much more strongly in later centuries. At first, it entered a world already rich with ancestral rites, Confucian ethics, Daoist ideas, and local religious practices. New teachings had to be translated, explained, and compared with familiar concepts. This process took time. It was not a simple replacement of one belief by another. Instead, ideas met, changed, and found new forms. The arrival of Buddhism shows that ancient China was not isolated behind mountains or walls. It was connected to a wider Eurasian world through travelers, merchants, envoys, and communities along routes that carried more than goods. A new idea can travel slowly, like a seed carried far from the field where it first grew. Fact 88. Frontier forts were places of waiting as well as fighting. Along northern and western frontiers, Han soldiers and officials lived in forts, watchtowers, and small settlements far from the great capitals. Excavated documents from some frontier sites preserve lists, letters, orders, and records of daily administration. These people guarded routes, watched for danger, managed supplies, and waited through long stretches of ordinary time. Frontier life was not constant battle. It involved cooking, repairing equipment, recording grain, writing messages, and looking out across wide landscapes. A watchtower is a symbol of vigilance, but it is also a lonely workplace. Someone had to climb the steps, scan the horizon, and decide whether a distant movement was dust, weather, animals, or travelers. History often depends on people watching patiently when nothing seems to happen. Fact 89. The Han used crossbows with standardized parts. Crossbows were important weapons in the Qin and Han periods. Their mechanisms could be made with standardized bronze parts, helping states equip large forces more consistently. A crossbow stores energy in a bent bow and releases it through a trigger system, allowing a bolt to be shot with considerable force. The technical detail matters because it shows the connection between craft and government. A weapon is not only an object of violence, it is also a product of mines, workshops, measurements, labors, supply, chains, and training. Ancient states that could organize these things gained an advantage. It is a sober reminder that technology can serve many purposes. The same skill that makes a precise tool or vessel can also shape the balance of power between rival armies. Fact 90. Han ships connected rivers, coasts, and southern seas. Rivers and seas carried people and goods through ancient China. The Yangtze and other waterways linked inland regions, while coastal routes connected ports and distant communities. Sea trade associated with the Silk Roads began in the Qin and Han periods and expanded over later centuries. Ships moved more slowly than modern transport, but they could carry heavy loads of grain, timber, pottery, textiles, and other goods. Water travel also brought uncertainty. Winds changed, rivers flooded, sandbars shifted. Yet for many travelers, a boat was the most practical way to move through a landscape of great distances. At night, a vessel on a broad river could make the world feel very large. Dark water below, stars above, and a small lamp marking the human presence between them. We are moving toward the end of our journey now, though the ancient world itself does not end neatly. It continues through workshops, homes, laws, frontier forts, and the slow movement of words across a page. What remains most clearly is not only a list of emperors. It is a collection of habits. Watching rivers, honoring the dead, making tools, sharing food, writing records, and looking for patterns in a changing sky. Let those small human habits remain with you as the final facts settle gently into place. Fact 91. Craft workshops connected raw materials with finished goods. Ancient Chinese cities and towns contained workshops for bronze, iron, pottery, lacquer, textiles, bone, wood, and other crafts. Each workshop depended on materials coming from elsewhere. Clay came from earth, metal ores came from mines, wood came from forests, silk came from households raising worms and mulberry trees. A finished object, therefore, carried a hidden geography. A bronze vessel in a tomb might contain metal from distant places, fuel from nearby trees, and patterns taught across generations of artisans. Workshops make history feel tangible because they show people at work with heat, dust, tools, and skill. The grandest monuments were built from such labor. Behind every empire stood people who knew how to make things carefully, one object at a time. Fact 92. Chinese script created continuity across changing speech. The Chinese writing system changed greatly over time, from oracle bone forms to bronze inscriptions, seal script, clerical script, and later styles. Yet the long continuity of written characters allowed texts, names, and ideas to travel across regions where spoken languages and pronunciations could differ. This did not make communication effortless, and literacy was never universal. Still, writing gave officials and scholars a powerful shared medium. A document could cross a mountain range and remain legible to someone whose everyday speech sounded different from the writer's. This is one reason script became so central to government and culture. It did not only record language, it helped create a durable world of administration, learning, memory, and argument across enormous distances. Fact 93. Calligraphy grew from the act of writing. In ancient China, writing was valued not only for what it said, but for how it looked. The movement of the brush, the balance of strokes, the rhythm of a line, and the energy of a character could all be admired. This appreciation developed further in later periods, but its roots lie in a culture where writing, record-keeping, and moral cultivation were closely connected. A brush does not simply mark a surface. It leaves a trace of pressure, speed, pause, and control. That made writing feel personal. Two people could write the same character, yet the result could seem different in spirit. Calligraphy turns the practical act of recording words into an art of motion. It lets thought become visible through the hand. Fact 94. Ancient Chinese cities were carefully planned, but always changing. Cities such as Chang'an and Luoyang had walls, gates, markets, palaces, workshops, and residential districts. Their layouts could express order, hierarchy, and state power. A ruler's palace might be placed in relation to cardinal directions, while market areas and administrative zones were supervised and recorded. Yet no city was ever as tidy in lived reality as it was on a plan. People crowded streets, repaired homes, carried water, cooked food, argued, celebrated, and made private adjustments behind public walls. Archaeology often reveals this difference between ideal order and everyday improvisation. A city is a design, but it is also 1,000 habits. The lines of a map show where roads should be. The feet of ordinary people show where life actually goes. Fact 95. Women appear in ancient records in many roles. Ancient China was often organized around male authority in family and government, but women were never absent from history and the museum. They appear as mothers, craft workers, farmers, market participants, ritual figures, royal consorts, poets, and members of powerful families. The evidence is uneven because most surviving records were written by elite men and focused on public life. Yet archaeology and texts together reveal more varied lives than a simple stereotype allows. Fu Hao is one famous example, but she was not the only woman whose presence mattered. Household work, textile production, childcare, food preparation, ritual participation, and family strategy all shaped society. Much of this labor left few written names, but it sustained every palace, village, and marketplace. Fact 96. Family households were economic units as well as emotional ones. In ancient China, A household was often a place of production, as well as family life. People grew food, spun thread, wove cloth, stored grain, raised children, cared for elders, and managed obligations to relatives and officials. The ideal household described in some texts was orderly and cooperative, but real households varied greatly by wealth, region, and circumstance. Some included servants or laborers. Some struggled with taxes, debt, poor harvests, or military service. Yet the household remained a central unit through which the state reached ordinary people. Census counts, taxes, labor duties, and legal responsibilities were often organized around families. The home was therefore private and public at once, a place of affection, survival, work, and connection to a much larger political world. Fact 97. Law shaped everyday life as well as crime. Qin and Han legal systems included rules about taxes, labor, property, officials, family obligations, and many kinds of wrongdoing. Surviving legal texts show that governments tried to classify behavior in detail and record decisions carefully. Laws could be harsh, especially under the Qin, and punishment was a real instrument of state power. But law was not only about dramatic crimes. It also concerned practical life. Who owed what? How an office should function? What happened when a contract was broken, or how people should register? The existence of such rules does not mean everyone obeyed them. It means the state wanted a written framework for managing a large population. In the quiet space of a bamboo document, an empire tried to turn complicated human life into categories that officials could count. Fact 9080. Ox. Rebellions reminded rulers that power depended on people. The fall of Qin and many later Han crises showed that an empire could not survive through command alone. Heavy labor demands, harsh policies, corruption, food shortages, and struggles that could all weaken trust. Rebellions were not caused by one single problem, and historical accounts often simplify them after the fact. Still, they reveal an important truth. Rulers depended on farmers, soldiers, workers, officials, and local community continuing to cooperate with the system. When too many people felt that the burden was unbearable, the grand structure could crack. The mandate of heaven gave later writers a way to explain such moments morally. But beneath the moral language were real human pressures: hunger, fear, anger, and the longing for a life that felt more secure. Fact 99. The end of the Han did not end Chinese civilization. The Han dynasty ended in 220 CE after years of political fragmentation and conflict. Later stories often remember the period that followed through the drama of the Three Kingdoms. But the end of one dynasty was not the end of the people. Languages, crafts, farms, cities, or ideas that had developed before it. Families continued. Texts were copied. Roads remained. New states drew on old practices while creating different futures. This is a useful way to think about all ancient history. A dynasty can fall, but a civilization is not a single building that collapses in one night. It is more like a landscape. Rivers continue. Fields are replanted and people carry memories forward, even when the banners above them change. Fact 100. Ancient China is a story of continuity and change. The deepest lesson of ancient China may be that continuity does not mean sameness. Rivers, writing, family obligations, ritual, farming, and memory created long threads across centuries. At the same time, every period changed those threads. New states rose. Old cities declined. Ideas argued with one another. Technologies spread. People moved through landscapes that were never fixed. The ancient past is therefore not a single golden age preserved behind glass. It is a long series of human attempts to make order in a changing world. That is why history can feel both distant and familiar. People watched weather, worried about food, taught children, honored the dead, made music, traded goods, and looked up at the stars. Across all the centuries, those small acts remain quietly recognizable. We have reached the end of our journey through ancient China. Tonight we began in early villages, where people grew millet and rice, shaped clay, and learned to live with the changing moods of rivers. We moved through the Bronze Age, when Shang rulers asked questions of vase of oracle bones and artists made vessels that carried memory and ritual. We wandered through the Zhou world, where thinkers argued about virtue, law, harmony, and the natural way. Then we followed the rise of Qin and Han across roads, canals, markets, frontiers, tombs, libraries, and long trade routes. What remains, when the names and dates begin to fade, is a simple feeling of continuity. People made plans for seasons that they might not see. They stored grain. They taught children. They watched for rain. They played music in rooms that are gone now. They wrote words that crossed centuries. They built things to last, and then watched some of them disappear. Ancient China was not quiet. In every moment, no human history is. But across its long story, there were always quiet moments inside the noise. A lamp beside a bamboo text, water running through a field, a brush resting after a line of writing, a bell growing silent, a boat moving through dark water beneath the stars. You do not need to carry the whole history with you. Let it become lighter now. Let the rivers, mountains, bronze, jade, and distant city walls drift farther away. Thank you for spending this time with history to fall asleep. Rest well, sleep deeply, and good night.